later on. And as I said, welcome everyone. My name is Rena Goldenberg-Lynch, and together with Inga Woodstra, we are the co-founders of the Big Fish D&I Academy. What we do is provide diversity and inclusion training to those who are in the business, in the space of diversity and inclusion, whether you're in-house or whether you're a consultant or somebody who aspires to become one. We offer all types of programs. At present, virtually only, but that might change as time progresses. Inga, say hello so that everybody knows who you are and where you are.
Yeah, hi, it's Inga Woodstra, and jointly with Rena, I run the Big Fish Academy. And next to that, I run my own company, helping organizations who, mostly in tech and engineering, with getting gender balance. So that's about recruiting more women, making sure women advance, and keeping women in.
Thank you, Inga. Today's session is one of our free sessions that we offer on a monthly basis. We call them an expert interview, where we invite an expert on a particular topic and we have a conversation with them. And not just with them, but also with you, our audience, which is why we invite you to turn on your camera if you like. And today we're talking about the future of flexible working, a very au fait topic right this moment. But we will be going, of course, from before the lockdown as well as well beyond COVID-19, we hope. Our guest today is Amy Bartrip. Hello, Amy.
Hi, everyone.
Amy is acting head of HR at Metaswitch Networks, which is a software company. And she's been with Metaswitch for a little bit over a year, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, about a year and a quarter.
Yes, and then prior to which you've been working with in HR for about 12 years in organizations like the Financial Times, HCA, which is the healthcare sector, and the Southern Cooperative, and a number of others. Is that right?
Yep, yeah, you got it spot on. Thank you.
And I know that flexible working in particular is something that you love to tackle and have done a lot in and with, both at Metaswitch and before. And we are looking forward to hearing your experience about that.
Yeah.
I just wanted to set the scene first about flexible working, and maybe the first thing to do is perhaps define it and make it clear how it's different from any other type of flexible working, like agile working or other terminology that's used. Amy, would you be able to help us with that?
Yeah, so I guess when Inga first asked me to do this talk, it was really interesting. It was a few months ago, and we were before this pandemic, and we never could have predicted that we'd all be sat at home talking about flexible working. So things have changed, but I guess historically, how I think about flexible working, I think of that as doing something different to what traditionally someone might have done. So that could be part-time, so maybe someone reduces hours. It could be flexing shift patterns. It could be job sharing, compressing hours, time back in lieu, term time working. It could be permanent, ad hoc. Pre-COVID, I worked from home 1 day a week, and that was flexible working for me. We haven't touched too much on my current company, but it's a global company, and I've got reports in the States and the UK, and they're West Coast states. So the earliest they kind of come online is probably about 4:30 p.m. UK time. So for me, having some flexibility just meant I could balance those teams and sort of my working patterns. So I think it's all encompassing. I think it's the ability to do something on a permanent basis or as needed, so people can just better balance work and life.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you for that. And while as we were talking about this, if you would like to let us know in the chat box whether you're currently working flexibly, or I suppose not currently, but perhaps currently as well, but maybe immediately before the lockdown. And if you're not currently working flexibly, tell us whether you would like to. So that's just to get an idea of where you stand on that. And Amy, so thank you for offering us an explanation of what flexible working is. What isn't it? You know, when people throw around terms like agile working and dynamic working, is that also flexible working?
I mean, I work in the tech space. So agile working is a way of doing project management. So if you're using it in a strictest term like that, probably not. But a lot of people do use dynamic working. So Barclays, their flexible working policy pre-COVID was called the dynamic working policy, and it very much probably reflects the way I think about flexible working and what I described. Caveat, I've never worked there, but I like reading what other people do. So that's kind of where I picked that up from. For me, if I use the word agile in a tech firm, that just wouldn't go down because it's a methodology to bringing out products. But I know that there are people that call it agile working. I know that agile working can be linked to hot desking as well, and in some cases that leads to flexible sort of working patterns. So potentially, but I think my advice is whenever you're talking about it, a definition, just as you did, Rena, is really helpful because it means different things to different people.
Yeah. And so maybe for our conversation today, shall we then agree that when we're talking about flexible working, we're talking about all forms, including agile and dynamic?
Yeah, we'll try and do the best attempt
Yes.
to kind of encompass all of those. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. So let's look at how does it work for you at MetaSwitch then? Do you have an agile working, a flexible working policy?
Yes, we definitely have a flexible working policy. Just a little bit of background on MetaSwitch, we're about 900 employees globally, lots of different jurisdictions, but we have one flexible working policy that is kind of, I describe it as our philosophy and approach. It's not legal, it's really conversational. If you're interested in any of these things, you're going to be supported. Talk to us, have a chat with your manager. If it's a permanent change, we might ask you to trial it a bit to see if it works both sides. That's all it is. You only need to come and talk to my team, the HR team, if there are some issues. So it's really, really out there selling the approach and getting behind that. The business itself, MetaSwitch, it's about 30 years old. So we're not a tech startup at all, but we still got kind of a bit of a family feel, even though we're now at this 900 employee mark. And there's always been different types of working patterns. There's lots of people that work part-time, or they flex different hours, or they just prefer starting later. We've got some real hardcore techies, and some of them, they want to work funny hours, and that suits them, and that's okay with us, because it's about how can we keep you happy, how can we create a really good culture. We're in such a demanding industry in terms of the talent. We want to retain that, so it's all about making the best environment for those people to succeed. So it is a big part of MetaSwitch, and one of the things that I did when I first joined was I did do a policy review, and I was talking to a lot of people within the business, and it was just due an update, and that update is very much what I've said, just a real philosophy. We're pro this, talk to us. That's all it is.
And that's great. It's a great attitude and a platform to have for flexible working. But let's get real for a minute. I'd love to hear the reality of it. How is it? How does it work? Is it working? Is everybody on board? And who takes it if they do take up flexible working?
So yeah, let's get real. It's a really good question. So let's flip that. What are the challenges? Some of the challenges we've had is there's a historical view within MetaSwitch that if you're a manager, it is difficult to work flexibly or remote, because very much being a manager and a leader at MetaSwitch feels very different at the other organizations I've worked at. It's very supportive, pastoral. It's way, there's a lot more to it. So the historical view is if you're working flexibly, you're not accessible for your team. So therefore, how are you going to do that? And that was an issue for us. And Inga touched on the beginning of the call, the importance of being able to help females progress. By the way, I don't just mean females, I mean everybody should be entitled to flexible working. But one of the angles I took in this, we did see within our data that women were only getting to a certain point within the engineering function and not progressing. And a lot of it was hinged on this historical view of if you're a manager, you can't work flexibly. And so there is a bit of a mindset shift and influence that we are still going through, which is it's not about the hours you work, it's what you do with them and how productive you are, making best use of your time and setting people up to succeed. So I'm sitting here saying, is that 100% been adopted? No, I do think COVID, if you look at what's the positive stuff and we learn, it's really shifted that a lot, because we've
Yeah.
had to think really creatively, particularly, where people are now trying to be, stay at home teachers, parents, everything. I'm really hoping no one's going to burst in my door now. I don't know about all of you, but it's not working from home. It's sort of working during a crisis. So if you take the positive things, COVID is definitely helping me challenge that mindset a bit and flipping it around. What the expectations, what do people do? And that's only going to help some of those historical mindsets. So I would
Yeah.
say that's our reality.
That's great, and I know I've heard from other clients that I'm working with the same thing, that they were surprised at how easy it is actually to accommodate working from home, and it's running better than expected. That the infrastructure is working, people are responsible and trustworthy.
Yeah.
So hopefully these are lessons that they will be taking forward with them for the post-COVID-19 world, which we will get to. While we're talking, I'd love to hear also from our audience, what are some of the challenges that you have encountered around working flexibly? And if not you, and if you're a consultant and working with other businesses, what are some of their challenges that you have heard about? Or maybe your own direct clients, employees who have not been able to take advantage of whatever was offered. And while we do that, Amy, how does what you are setting up now and what have been done at MetaSwitch, how does that compare with what you had in the other sectors? And let's look at the
Yeah.
Financial Times.
Yeah, of course. So in the year, my last year at the Financial Times, so I was there 5 years. And I think hopefully most people know it's a medium organisation, journalists, salespeople, advertising, tech, all of the website was created in-house. So that was kind of all encompassing, lots of different sectors, lots of different roles. Also a global business. And our starting point was perhaps fairly similar to MetaSwitch, and what I would call old-fashioned sort of personnel type policy to flexible working. Submit your formal request, sit in a meeting with a HR person present, all very formal. I think the policy was like something like 20 pages. It was so off-putting. I got bored. I work in HR. By the way, I love Financial Times, but this is actually my feedback on it. We also were a global business. It was really inconsistently applied. Different departments, managers had different views. And a big thing for us was, how can we be better at this so we can attract and retain talent, again, in a competitive marketplace? And how can we leverage that? And a lot of it, the FT was 135 years old. So how can we ready ourselves for the future workforce where graduates and people like that have different expectations? So it was, how can we just get with the times a little bit, and what can we do? So it was a big project, and it was a year long, actually, just to give you a bit of an idea of sort of the influence and things behind it. But essentially what I did is I sought volunteers in each region and department, set up a working group, did a SWOT to understand what was working, what wasn't. I went through a whole load of data from engagement surveys, D&I data. I did extensive research of loads of companies. So I mentioned Barclays, but there's loads of other good companies out there, Innocent Smoothies, Netflix, anything. It didn't have to be industry specific. And then redid the policy in a really conversational, positive, approachable way. I would say extensive senior leader and board buy-in, which is why I'd say a year. I definitely quartered it out. And then we had a big change management programs, because you have the best policy in the world, but if it's not understood, felt, followed, it doesn't really matter. It just sits on your intranet somewhere. So our change management program was very much around getting in all hands meetings, in company meetings, emails, posters in all offices. It was amazing to talk to the team in Manila and see what they were doing and how they were taking it and rolling it out. We did case studies from people all throughout the business saying around how they work flexibly and how it helped them. And a big part of our campaign was, regardless of reason, regardless of who you are, we really wanted to challenge those stigmas. And there's examples of people doing things, I work these shifts so I can walk my dog before work. We've got senior leaders that said, I've got an elderly, dad, I want to spend some more time with him. It it was every level, and it really brought it to life and made it real and made it people feel more like that they could have that conversation. So that was kind of the approach that I went through there.
Which is fantastic, because it sounds like a whole journey from something that was clunky and probably difficult, albeit allowable, but not simple to approach, to ask for, and also then which I have also experienced in with my previous employers, that it depended a lot on the discretion of that particular team leader. And by normalizing it, by simplifying the process, by having these conversations, all of a sudden you're taking whatever they're experiencing as challenges out of the equation. So that's great. And again, while we're talking, if you have any questions for Amy as well, please pop them into the chat box. I'm going to refer to you, Inga, once in a while to see if there are any questions for Amy that are coming out of the chat. So please feel free to do that at any time. Are there any challenges on the chat box?
Loads of challenges came in. So, I mean, see if you can respond to this, Amy, or maybe you as well, Rena. The problem is obviously stable technology. I'm not sure that anyone's got the answer to that.
I think never more so has that been true in the current climate. I recognise, and I'm fortunate that I work for a tech business, but that doesn't mean to say that I'm not prepared for tech failures. Embarrassingly so, I've got my phone here because it's happened to me yesterday. Virgin went down and I had to quickly dial back in with my mobile, and I've done it today because I'm talking to all of you, and I don't know if that's going to happen. I think understanding and compassion and empathy has been never more important. And I can say that sitting, just outside of London, and infrastructure is very good. I appreciate that some of our remote offices in some places, just internet connectivity isn't good. Right now, we're doing the best we can. I guess longer term, it's around how can we support that. My business has been fantastic. They've also sent me a 4G dongle, so if really needed, I can then boost up my laptop. So we have done everything we can to make that better. I'm fortunate that, whatever I need, if I need another computer screen, if I need a stand, a wireless, this, that, the other, I've got all of that, absolutely fine. Let's set you up to succeed. It is in our interest that you can work as best as you can. So that's been our philosophy and approach. I know businesses have given bonuses. What we've done is, look, we'll provide you with what we can, or a few items we can expense. But I'm not saying it doesn't fail. It does sometimes.
Yeah, some big challenges coming in that several people are facing. Jobs where you really can't work flexibly, and does that exist? Should we give up on some jobs in a production environment? Line managers working remotely struggle with feeling that control. In a construction industry on site, you work in a shift. You've got to have enough people there. So, I mean, how can that be done flexibly? How do you ensure consistency across projects? Is that something you've got experience with at all, Amy? The jobs that can't be done flexibly?
So I think it goes back to that definition of flexibly. I've talked a lot about remote working because that's probably my current, that's very real to me. But working flexibly is around changing shift patterns and start times and finish times and split shifts. We are seeing split shifts ourselves right now as people are balancing all sorts of things, compressing hours, time back in lieu. My personal view is it's not a case you can't work flexibly. There are just some specifics that will be more challenging with some roles. So we're very fortunate that the vast majority of our roles can be done remotely, but I'm sitting here knowing that there's a small handful of people that it just possibly can't, and we're aware of those, that they're small, but it does happen. I was talking to somebody I know that works in Amazon, and she was talking around the warehouses, how they are trying to stagger start and finish times. A lot of that's to do with social distancing, but what the advantages are of that, where people have got commute times, the ability to stagger shift patterns, that actually could be flexible working where they get time back. That's really helpful. I go into North London every day. I can sit here saying I'm really not missing the M25 at all. And if for me going back flexibly is sometime at home, and maybe staggering my start time so it works well with my US team, that's only amazing, because You know, as I said, I don't miss the M25. So I don't want to dismiss it. It's very real. There are more challenges in some industries, but I like throw everything up in the air and be a bit creative and just think about it and talk to your people what's important to them. You know, there's a lot of my people now that can't wait to get back in the office. The office is a social hub, and you know, we're a tech company, we've got pool tables, we've got cool things, you know, and they have things that they do in their lunch breaks, play sports, and you know, all of that. That's very much a feel of our company, and there are people that are missing it, and we have to cater for both sides.
That's
Yeah,
a
and
very good
that came
point.
up in the
And
chat. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
just sorry, and I just wanted to mention it, and then we'll go on to one of the other challenges I see has come up. Is that we had that very conversation about flexible working and shift working with Transport for London, and of course there. I think the starting point was, well, there are certain positions within TfL that cannot be performed flexibly. And we had that conversation for only an hour and a half around the table. And during that hour and a half, we were able to reach a position where, in fact, that was a fallacy. That was the start. It's the beginning assumption. So what I did at that point is say, okay, so we have certain requirements that the business has. Running the tube, for instance, at certain hours. Those are the business requirements. What within that can be offered flexibly? And just looking at how you approach the business requirement and what is in fact needed allows people to start thinking a little bit more flexibly around how to accommodate flexible working. And it turned out that some of the less desirable shifts for, say, family members were actually very desirable to single people, you know, who prefer to work at night and to earn a little bit extra rather than having to work during the day. So there are ways around it, and I agree with you. It's all around that conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard, and you said I like to think about it as not how productivity is going to be impacted, but how you can enhance it. So conversations that I'm having with my senior leaders at the moment is, you know, we were in a good positive pace. We had flexible working, but when we moved to working from home with COVID, a lot of them were predicting productivity to be significantly less, which I found quite interesting and sort of shared their starting point. So one business function was predicting like productivity to be like 25% less than normal. And instantly they were happily able to turn around. That's not the case at all. Yes, there is some impact because people are caring for elderly people, neighbours, they've got kids at home. We mentioned the tech thing, but it's minimal. It's absolutely minimal.
Absolutely right. I think that's a very good point about looking at it as business enhancing or productivity enhancing.
Yeah.
I want to move on to the next part of this conversation, and that's around looking at what flexible working might look like when we do go back to the office, and that's directly related to one of the challenges coming up on the chat box. I'm going to give you a crystal ball, Amy, and I'm going to ask you to look at it and tell us what you think flexible working will look like when we're all asked to return, albeit gradually, to our offices.
Oh, great question. I'm going to start with a little bit of humour, which is, I think about this stuff anyway, but probably like everyone on this call, you read, you stay up to date with what's industry news. But I saw a great meme, and I know that a meme is probably not the most academic starting point, but I'm going to start with this, which said, it said flexible working was enhanced by A, your CEO, B, your CTO, or C, COVID-19. And what I would say there is, by the way, if my CEO and CTO watch this back, love you both. Not at all. I'm not pointing that at a message, but what I'm saying is it has expedited stuff for a lot of people. So without a doubt, there are going to be changes. And at the moment at MetaSwitch, what I'm trying to do is try and understand people's wants and desires in a way that we're not committing. We're seeking to understand what's important to our people. As I said, it's very people-centric company. And what we're starting to see is there's a bit of a split. So there's a split between people, I cannot wait to get back, I miss it. You know, we have offices in a lot of big cities, so, you know, Edinburgh, London, Cambridge. So there are people that are squidged into flats, trying to work amongst housemates. There's you know, people doing all sorts of things. I just want to get back to my office, and we need to prepare and support that. But there are also other people probably sitting here like myself going, God, isn't it nice not just sit on the M25? This morning I got up, sat outside with a lovely cup of coffee. I knew I had this today. I had a bit of thinking space, started work, you know, and I was somebody who worked flexibly already. So I'm starting to ask myself, what do I want? And our people are too. And I've got examples in my team. And when Rena and I spoke last week, we thought it was quite interesting. The graduate recruitment manager who reports in to me, she's got a family. We are still interviewing. We're doing all of our interviews remote. So nothing has changed for her. If anything, it's harder and faster paced because we just kind of need to get through our pipeline. And actually what she said to me is, you know, I'm actually going to work 6 till 1. So she's going to get up early and work till lunchtime. She's an early riser. It really suits her because her kids sort of sleep in, they've got a few hours to keep themselves busy, then she can go and do sort of, you know, daycare stuff, take them out for picnics, bike rides, all of that. And it's really working for her and it's really working for me. And obviously the conversation we will have soon is, well, what do you want to retain when things are a bit more normal? And so at MetaSwitch, we're working to understand what people are thinking and wanting. We're asking that to be manager-led. Our senior leadership team wanted me to send out a survey. I said, no, I really want managers to be having that conversation and be fed up by the senior management team. So there's definitely some managers that are going, thanks a lot, Amy. I'm now going to have some quite difficult conversations, but I think this is the right thing to do. I would like us to continue in what we do and putting our people first and accommodate both sides of the spectrum. I think the challenge post-COVID is at the moment everyone's at home. When you then start to have this hybrid, some people in the office, some people at home, how do you ensure that team cohesion, particularly in the tech industry? If there's anyone who works in tech industry, we work in an agile way, so we have scrums, daily stand-ups, that sort of thing. How do you do that? It can be done, but a little bit more thought. And I was reading actually something about other tech firms that are thinking about this, and they were thinking about how they might split, you know, if people want to work from home, that's time to be doing, but the time in the office is time to collaborate, come together, you know, work on projects. And that's quite an interesting dynamic. And I could see that potentially being something we were interested in. I think, you know, other organisations, people like Barclays and WPP have come out already and said it's going to look way different. They can't imagine having 7,000 people in a big building again. And, you know, how can they leverage that? I'm not at that scale, so I can think about it differently, but I'd say it's going to look different. We've challenged a mindset out of a really bad place of COVID-19. Listen to your employees and how can you leverage that is my thought process.
No, that's great advice. And my husband, for instance, he works in a building that houses normally 1,500 employees, but they said that they can only, with social distancing, they can only accommodate 350, which obviously means a lot of people are not going to be going to work. And so what would you say to a manager who is considering whom to bring back, you know, and how to make that in such a way that those people who are necessarily needing to be back in the office, they too have the option to work flexibly?
So that scale is a really big question, and I guess you're going to need more structure and a bit more top down if you're working in that scale. I'm not there, and I'm going to talk from my experience. I feel more comfortable saying that, but we're a business of 900. We've got global offices, and what we've got is a return to office working group that's split function, and then we have a regional lead that represents that region. And so we are not top down, we're kind of a bit of bottom ups and top down in our approach. So we've done the research, this is what we think we should do, how do you think that would work in your region, get that input, run it out. We are now in the place where we at MetaSwitch have said we don't anticipate globally many to start phasing back to at least the end of September. That could push out because we need to give our people a marker in the sand. They're sat there sort of waiting. But if you want or need to come back earlier, we can make provision for that. It's going to look significantly different. There's going to be social distancing. There's going to be desks separated. We're probably not going to run canteens, but we can do that. But you need to share that information with your manager, and that's been collected centrally. And so what we wanted to do is just give a picture that you're not going back to how you knew it before, because we still think till the end of the year social distancing is going to be in place. So if it's a want or need for whatever reason, and that works for you, amazing. But if you think you wanted to come back because it's going to be like, you know, you can go to lunch with your mates and all of that, it's not going to look like that. And that's kind of what we're trying to capture. So that note went out this week, and I've probably, out of the 900 people, maybe had about 5 people globally put their hand up so far. So it's not much, but we have painted a picture that it's not going to be great, and we've got a very open feedback. And one of the engineers emailed me yesterday, said, I would have liked to come back, but you painted a picture, it looks like prison, so no thanks.
That's a good lesson for employers and managers.
That's kind of thinking, that's a really nice prison.
Yeah, well, I often think about that as well, is that, you know, the world that we're going to initially come back to isn't going to be that social hub of activity that we're used to in our offices. We're not all going to be at the canteen. Who knows if the canteen is even going to be operational if we're slimming down numbers. So it is going to be a completely different world. I want a question for the audience, and then we'll go quickly to the chat box in a minute. But for you, what would you like to retain in flexible working, or would you like it to look like when the time comes to go back to the office? Or do you have any suggestions as to how to approach going back to the office to managers or employees as well? And Inga, I know I see things in the chat box. I'm not actually reading them. So please, can you let us know if there's anything else that we should mention?
Yeah, a question from someone saying, it's really hard to social distance in our office with co-working spaces and a lot of people in the office, which I sort of think you've answered. And one thing that I've heard from a client, what they're doing is also what they call flip-flopping, which is have sort of a rota where, you know, you're in the office 3 days a week, your co-worker 2 days a week, or, you know, sort of where if you're in that same area, you have to figure out together who's going to be there, because only 1/3 of people can be there. And that sort of is very much like conversation style as well.
I've heard of that. And even on the, you know, the start phase of people starting to work from home, there was businesses doing like an A team and a B team. We started with a philosophy and approach, and one of those approaches was, we are a tech business and we want to look after our communities and not overburden them, and as such we want to be one of the last to go back in respect of that. However, we still want to put employees first, and if people want and need, so we're not going there because we don't feel we need to, and we feel like we've got something to do for society to help with that. We also acknowledge that a lot of our people have to get on public transport. You know, we've got hubs in KL and Mexico City and London and Edinburgh. A lot of those people are public transport commuters. So yes, but we decided not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then a question about disputes. If you decide top down is how I'm reading it. Well, let me just read it and see what you make of it. I'm hoping to hear if staff would dispute with HR on split teams, date of commencement, and things like that.
So one of our values is we take ownership, and another one is we challenge. And I shared that anecdote of that email yesterday. That's kind of my daily, that is my life. Like one of the things in my job is to be a line of sight into our employees. So practically, I don't anticipate disputes or anything formal. We don't kind of do it that way. I'd just get an email or someone to pick up the phone and go, Amy, I really didn't like that, and here's why, and can we do this? So we are very consultative and collaborative. It's not a vote by democracy. We will put a line in the sand. Like, there are definitely people that would have liked to have gone back before the end of September, but I don't envisage like formal ER disputes, because it's just not that environment.
And you would say though that in let's say in an environment that is a bit more so we say traditional, how do you think it's all right for employees to challenge some of these HR decisions?
Well, I do, because
I do too. So
I say that knowing that there could be some people on here whose jobs are entirely employee relations, and they're going to go thanks and cheers for that. But
Sorry.
I like to say that I put the human back into human resources, and I'm approachable, and I make the people stuff relevant for our people. So if you don't like something, yeah, you should say it. And whether that's to your manager and your manager shares, we do a lot of senior leadership, what's the readout in your team, and that's sharing upwards. And it's my job to go through that. I look at data. So we're doing pulse surveys every 2 weeks at the moment. So me and my team look at those. So yeah, I do think they should challenge. I think it's important, and now's the time for like empathy and compassion. But that's me. And
Yeah, and there's a great
And
point from David linking to that I just wanted to bring up, saying
yeah.
everyone's currently saying, oh, we're flexible and adaptable, and look how everyone's working remotely now. But it is going beyond remote working. It's about the welfare of staff also moving up
yes,
the agenda, which is interesting, right?
definitely. This isn't working from home. This is trying to work at home in a crisis. 100%. Yeah, it's completely different.
Yeah, I think so too. And on the challenging point as well, I think in the interest of full disclosure, managers should know what people are thinking, and then they can make a more informed decision with that information, in my
Yes.
view. Yeah. That's great. Let's move on to our final part of the conversation around best practices and some tips and advice. And that goes out not just for Amy, but everybody here. If you have any tips or examples of best practices you want to share, please do. Amy, for us, let's start with, what does a successful remote or flexible working scheme look like?
For me, it's applicable to everyone, regardless of who you are, tenure, gender, what your role is. I appreciate 100% that the types of flexibility will vary for some of those reasons. And our receptionist, for instance, that type of flexibility, what we can do for her, does vary. But I think it's for everybody. I think it's understanding that the approach isn't the policy, it's the mindset, the adoption, it's the challenging the status quo. It's hinged on good conversations, manager to employee and vice versa, trust, but really clearly focusing on productivity and expectations. So I think a lot of people were apprehensive, or is a bit, not adopted because people were worried. And where's that worry coming from? Well, how am I going to know what they're doing? How productive am I? And actually, when you unpick some of that, well, how many one-to-ones are you having? Do they have KPIs, objectives, however your business works? And actually, what it comes down to, that if you put more rigor in place, actually it can happen, and people can work differently. And you can leverage that to be more productive, because people have different preferences. I am way better in the morning than I am in the evening. And if there's some thinking I need to do, I'd much prefer to do that early in the morning. Like I said, fortunate this morning, I sat outside and did it with a cup of coffee. But I know that, and if I've got a way to get that into my working life, my manager's going to get the best from me. And I always take it down to that piece. Manager training, HR folk all on board so they can help. Challenge with data talks for itself. Be open, tweak, try stuff, be open with employees. Let's try it, let's see how it works. Those are my tips.
Those are great. And I was wondering also if you had any, I know that you obviously read about other companies doing good things, and if you had any examples you could share with us. I'll offer a couple that I am aware of. One is, you've already mentioned Barclays and their dynamic working. And I know that they have made it a point to offer all jobs when they go out on a dynamic working basis. And in order to do that, when they started the conversation around which jobs can and cannot be performed flexibly, instead of asking all team leaders to come up with which jobs can and cannot be done, they said, let's do the reverse. Why don't you, every team leader, tell me why a job cannot be done flexibly? And that just changes the way that you approach every position. So that's a best practice example. And then another one, I remember, speaking of your point on training managers, I used to work for ING Bank in London, but in the Netherlands they had introduced working from home, so hot desking essentially, a few years back, so maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And then the very first thing they did is train all their managers on how to work with remote teams. And that's to make sure that, because you have to give that resource to the managers, otherwise it's just not going to work, and you will have the reasons that challenges around flexible working exist will continue to exist. And I'll cite one more example, and that's a bit more of a sort of novel approach, again from a Dutch architects firm. And I heard this in a webinar, so I can't confirm that this is the case, and I don't have the name of the firm, but apparently they have at a certain hour in the evening, maybe 5 or 6, all your working desks are drawn up towards the ceiling, and you can no longer work at your desk. So you're forced to go home. And that's another way of encouraging, well-being and flexible working in the way they view it. So those are some of the examples I can share.
No, I love all of those, and that's why I like the Barclays one. Flip it on reverse.
Yeah.
Tell me why it can't be done. That's a really good one. Some of these I like. They're a bit quirky and they won't fit every culture, but I'm just going to share them. So Innocent Smoothies had a line, Dolly Parton used to work 9 to 5, but you don't have to. And that was on their job descriptions.
That's lovely. I love it.
I loved that one. And I hope I'm correct, because I said I did this research a couple of years ago, but I think it was Coca-Cola that had a policy around leaving loudly. And that was trying to say, if you want to leave a bit earlier because, I don't know, you've got something that's important to you, I don't know, like you're going to watch a school play, or you've got a theatre day, or something like that, leave loudly, destigmatize it. You don't have, the best worker isn't the one staying late. And I loved that, because even as someone who's pro-flexible working, when I was working in the City of London, you do feel a bit like, well, should I stay? My team's staying. Should I? No, actually, I'm going to go. And do you know what? I'm going to go to the theatre with my friends, whatever it is that's important to me. So I like those.
Yeah, those are great examples, I think, and that goes along with, having pictures of your family around your desk or your office, if there is a space, just to bring the whole person into the workplace as well. So a question out for you, the audience. So what has worked well for you when working flexibly or remotely? And the converse of that, what hasn't? What did you struggle with? And just to let us know what has worked, what hasn't, that would be great. Let's continue on with...
can I bring in, because there have been
some
questions
of course,
that I've sort of glossed over a bit, because they've sort of been answered, but I have the sense there's a bit more to say. In some cultures, and that's maybe not your culture, Amy, but maybe you have some people that there is this lack of trust, there's real disbelief about productivity, and it may be one manager and it may be the entire top team. What can you do if that is your company and you work there, or it's your HR, you're in an HR role and you want to change that?
So I might have glossed over it a little bit, but I mentioned that the FT project was a year-long project, and that was for a good reason. And there was definitely some regions where that was very prevalent, either from a trust perspective or just culturally. So in some of our Asian offices, for instance, it is very rare that an employee would leave before the manager left, and that was a thing culturally. And I can't change culture, but I sought to understand. I got input from the HR team there, the senior leaders, and the case studies was really helpful in bringing that to life and breaking down that stigma and asking managers to be role models. So we did manager briefings in each area, but sometimes the briefings needed to understandably be tailored for that environment. On the trust piece, we did have that in Manila, where we had a lot of our, supportive, like back office kind of functions. They're very, very much a call center kind of feel. A lot of that came down to giving managers that sense of, this is how you can work with this. This is how you set KPIs. This is how you have a difficult conversation, or this is how you can have meaningful conversations. it was never a case of let's launch a policy, here's a change management progress, quick, done, amazing. It was very much check-in points, and we had HR people on site who could give you real-time feedback of what they're going with. We could give advice, work on it together, including the senior leadership as part of that. But the big bit was getting that senior leadership buy-in. And how did we did that? Well, sorry, really good English. How do we do that? We went through data, we went through, as I said, there was a board proposal put forward. There was all of this external research, and we very much approached it with, here's what your people are saying, here's what other people are doing externally, here's a bunch of reasons why you should do it. We understand these are the reasons you're scared of it, but let's do reviews, let's check in. And that's how we tackled it. I acknowledge there's different starting places, whether that's in region, that's my experience at the FT, or just company wide, but you have to work from where you are. In your approach.
And I think that's a really good point around benchmarking as well. So starting with the benchmarking exercise, a case study, and benchmarking, where do you and your company relative to other companies, how do they do it? And not just as an example, but look, they are doing this, shouldn't we? Because the competition is a driver, particularly among a lot of senior managers. So that's helpful. And then there's also a lot of data around this. There are surveys that are put out by, particularly the one that I have in mind is TimeWise, which is a part-time organization promoting part-time work. And they have done many surveys that show that the majority of people, if they are not already working full-time, flexibly, they would like to. And interestingly, that statistic does not change depending on gender. Both men and women want to work flexibly. No one works to spend 80 hours a week in the office, and we all know that. So that is a good start with a conversation. And I think it'd be great also to hear if you have any resources, audience, to share with us on how to learn more about flexible working and how to approach it with your managers, with your colleagues, with HR, or generally how to get your head around that. Is there anything, Amy, that you can recommend for people to start thinking about?
Personally, I did a little bit of research before we were talking about this. Obviously, this is my world, I'm pro it, but I thought, okay, I'm gonna have a quick bit of research before I talk to you all. I'm going to quickly put this out there. Avoid all of like the HR blogs. There's loads of stuff out there at the moment. Lawyers are writing, how can you decline a flexible working request? Like, here are all these things. I think just like that's really dull, and that's not where we are. Like, read about how the companies are doing well and leverage that. Yes, as a business and as a company, you can have your own place, your own roles, where you sit within that. But if you start from a point of how can I decline it, you're not going to change anything. And fundamentally, I think coming out of COVID, we want to do all we can to look after our people and retain them. And so I avoid law stuff. I like reading what other businesses are doing. I like to come into things like this, talking to people like yourselves. I like reading quirky and fun ways. I think any data you can get, success stories, like that's really, really helpful. So I'm not going to call out, certain things. I just think stay up to date and keep talking.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm gonna plug one particular podcast that I'm partial to, which is Adam Grant's Work Life. If you're not familiar with that, it's a HBR sponsored podcast, and they talk about a lot of these different issues, and not just obviously flexible working, but how work impact on us as humans. So that's something that I found extremely interesting and useful as well. Sorry, Inga, I interrupted.
Yeah, because I was going to plug your webinars, because I think we have
you.
mentioned how you need to give managers support with how to work remotely in teams. You need to give teams support, and especially now in mental health. And Rena with Voice at the Table runs webinars at the moment addressing just those topics. And there's plenty around, but do you want to say something about those as well, Rena?
Yeah, thank you, Inga. Absolutely. So we are currently we run weekly webinars, and they are meant to address work and life circumstances. So there's a healthy dose of development, self-development and self-improvement, but a lot of talk around how to work remotely, how to lead from your kitchen table, how to run good virtual meetings. So if you want to look it up, you can find it either on Eventbrite, or you can email us, or if you go onto voiceatthetable.com and look at the calendar of events, they run every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Thank you for that plug, Inga.
Catherine Collas mentions the book What Works by Iris Bohner, with a lot of academic insight into gender equality. It's my favorite book. It shows how you can change, how you don't have to change the culture, but you just change the work processes.
Yeah.
And that sort of nudges people into the right behavior, which is, for instance, changing the policy from you can work flexibly if you request it, to saying all jobs are flexible unless the manager can show it really isn't possible in that particular role. So that's the type of behavioral changes. Let me see, I've got it right here.
It's like Blue Peter.
So we'll make sure we put that in the follow-up notes. Yeah,
Catherine's holding it up as well. It's disappeared in your virtual background, I'm afraid. But yes, that's right. So final few minutes for any questions that you might have for Amy or myself or Inga or each other, indeed, on this topic, or any other. And also, as we're thinking about it, I always like to think about making this a true practical experience for you, these talks. So I'd love to hear, and maybe Amy and Inga, we can contribute. What is it that you will do differently as a result of what you've heard on today's talk? And if you want to share it with us, we'd love to see it in the box as well. Inga, no, Amy, do you have any last sort of tips or advice for people about working flexibly, something that they might be able to adopt themselves as they go back to work, or maybe a conversation to have with their manager, or indeed as a manager, how to approach it? Less words of advice.
Last words of advice, I think the flip it, the understand from your people what they want, think about how to enhance productivity. So when you're talking to managers and senior leaders, getting their buy-in, you're on their side, you're trying to help them out, not opposed to what they may be thinking. And trust, support managers. So I didn't touch too much on it, but I know we've mentioned manager briefings, but what I really mean is give them scenarios, help them think about it, support them through this, but empower managers and employees. I don't think this is a HR process. I think we set up the principles, the guidance, the proposal to succeed, but it's a manager employee. So it allows for that conversation around that specific role and what that person needs to do, because there will be differences. And if you're in any doubt, it's my recommendation, it's not a no, it's a let's try it. I've got these reservations, but let's try it and see how it goes. And then you're being upfront and transparent with that employee.
Yeah, and if I can summarize the conversation today in one phrase, I would actually choose your phrase about putting the human into human relations, because that is what this is all about. That is the starting point of every conversation on this topic, and with that in mind, I think we can achieve a lot more than we believe we can.
Yeah, and the thing that will stay with me is that conversational style, where I think it is very much about the person doing the job will know how it can be done flexibly, right? Rather than sort of top down deciding which jobs can and can't. And sometimes it's not the person, sometimes you need the whole team, if you're working in shifts, or you're working in particular a reception area, or you're in manufacturing, but a team can often work it out. Okay, one of us wants to do it differently. So rather than saying, oh, it can't be done, or how can we do it? Just really ask, so, okay, how can we make that work? How could it work? And then going and finding that conversation, piloting and giving the support. Good point there, Amy. Making sure then once you do it, there are the resources for people to build those skills.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for sharing your knowledge and experience and resources with us. Thank you, everyone, for contributing with your thoughts and questions. Feel free to continue to let us know what you're committing to doing differently. And while you do that, I'll hand over to Inge for the wrap up.
Yeah, because I mean, I'd like to just look ahead at what's next. On 11th of June, we have with the Big Fish Academy a session on recruiting for diversity. So that, yeah, where we really go into what can you do to attract more diverse people? What can you do in your interview process, your selection process to make sure the bias is not in there? And how can you implement those things? It's really about de-biasing your entire recruitment process. So we look into that. That's 2 sessions of 90 minutes. Then we have another free session coming up on the 25th of June, which I have to check. Oh yeah, advancing women. How can you make sure women advance at the same rate of man? And that's my specialist topic. So Rina will be interviewing myself about my
Where's
book.
your book? Plug your book.
Yeah, is it somewhere? Yeah, about my book. Yeah. So many books that my own is hiding. Be gender smart. So we'll be talking about that. How can you be gender smart? How can you make sure you cater for both men and women in your company? And what can you get in place? What processes, what culture to make sure everyone can flourish and bring their best self to work, both men and women. So that's, and then lots coming up. So you'll be seeing those in our events update about the, you can sign up right now for events throughout the year. We have decided to take all our events virtual. We tried several of our training programs online. Frankly, not entirely sure if it would be as good as face-to-face, but we were actually so happy with the feedback and the interaction that we managed to get, where we do breakout groups and exercises, and that we decided to just take all our programs online for the entire of 2020. So we hope to see you at one of those programs.
Yes, and being more inclusive, also allowing people from other parts of the world to join in that way as well. And last but not least, thank you very much again for joining. And if I could ask you to take 2 minutes of your time to complete the feedback survey, the link is in the chat box. If you can click on that and let us know what you thought of the session, what we could improve on, and generally what you'd like to hear more of. And with that, I thank you very much. Thank you, Amy, once again for taking the time to speak with us today. A recording will be going out. And have a lovely day and weekend.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thank you for having me.
Really nice. Bye then.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Rina, Inga, do you want me to hang on, or?
You want to stop the recording, Rina?
Yeah, let me stop the recording.